The yarn I'm using in this tutorial is Lion Brand's Wool Ease yarn. You'll need nearly 3 balls of this, or approximately 255 grams of worsted weight yarn. You will need a measuring tape or something to measure your work, a stitch marker, some scrap yarn to put the back of the sweater on hold. There are 3 different circular needles recommended to knit this pattern. If you don't have access to all of these needles, I explain throughout the tutorial how you can knit it on just the largest size needles. So I have all of the needles recommended on the screen here. If you don't have them all, don't worry, I'll explain it as we go. You're also going to need a darning or tapestry needle. The gauge for this pattern is 18 stitches by 28 rows over 4 by 4 inches, and this is using the reverse hurdle stitch pattern. So I have that patterning put on the screen here if you'd like to knit your gauge swatch before we get going. We're going to be knitting the smallest size in this pattern today, which is the 12 to 18 month size. I also have the 2T, 3T, and 4T sizes available for purchase on my Ravelry and Etsy pages, which will be listed below. Although the smallest size is for a year-old baby, I have here my 5-month-old wearing it, and it's just cute and oversized no matter the age of the baby, so you can get away with it for a really long time. If you'd like to just knit the smallest size, there's no need to buy the pattern. I'll explain it all as we go, so let's get started. This sweater is worked bottom up, so we're going to get started with the ribbing on 4mm needles. We're going to start with the longer cord, so grab your 60cm 4mm needles, and we will cast on 140 stitches using the long tail cast on. I'm going to make a long tail of yarn here. Have a bunch of yarn on this end and the ball of yarn on the other end. So we're going to start with a slip knot. Going to wrap the yarn around my finger 3 times, grab the center strand, pull it over top here, grab this strand, pull it over top, and one final time, grabbing that strand, and there's our slip knot. Going to take this yarn, place it on our 4mm needles. If you're just using the larger needle size, the 5.5mm needles, go ahead and keep going with this step, and I'll show you what to do once we get to the ribbing. All right, so we have our first stitch on here. We need 139 more. So we're going to take our needle, go under the yarn on my thumb, grab the yarn on my index finger, and there's 1 stitch. Again, holding on here, under, grab, and pull through. One more time, under, grab, pull through. So there's 4 stitches. We need 140 stitches on the needles. Now that I have 140 stitches cast on, I want to go through and make sure that none of them are twisted on the needles. So I want all of the loops facing the same direction. So see how they've turned upside down here? I'm going to turn them back around, and I'm going to go all the way around the needle, making sure they're all right side up. Next, I'm going to take my stitch marker and place it on my right hand needle, and we're going to be doing a knit 1, purl 1 rib for 1 inch. So go ahead and knit into the first stitch, purl into the second, knit, purl, and we'll just continue like that, round and round. If you're on the larger needles, if you only have 1 needle type, you're going to just knit extra tight for this section. So instead of your regular tension, just knitting nice and evenly, you're going to be pulling these stitches a little bit tight so that you're achieving the look of knitting on a smaller needle. If you're knitting on your 4mm needles, keep going as usual. Just knit, purl, knit, purl, all the way around, and then continuing until this rib section measures 1 inch. The ribbing is now measuring 1 inch, so we're ready to start our body. We're first going to switch to our larger needle size. So go ahead and remove the stitch marker for a second. You can go ahead and knit right onto these new needles, or you can slip the stitches, which is what I prefer to do. So I'm just going to take my larger needles and slip all of these stitches on like this. Go all the way around. I like to show some troubleshooting sometimes. So I dropped a stitch off of this needle and I lost a bar here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up this stitch and put it on my right hand needle, and I'm also going to grab that bar that I've dropped, place it on the needle as well, Going to go in through the drop stitch, loop it around, and there we go. And that works no matter how many bars you've dropped. So say I dropped 2 here, I'm still gonna pick it up. I'm gonna go into the first bar, loop it around, and into the second bar, loop it around. If you drop a purl stitch, you're just gonna do that in reverse. So you can always salvage it. I'll show you a dropped purl stitch. So instead of going in through the front, I'm gonna go in through the back now, grab that stitch, and now the bar's in front here. I'm gonna place the bar on the needle, going in through the back, and looping the purl stitch through like that. So it's just doing the same thing as the knit stitch, but through the back instead of through the front. All right, I've slipped all of my stitches back onto the larger needles and I've replaced my stitch marker. We're ready to start the patterning. So this is a 4-row repeat and we're going to start with purl stitches. So we're going to purl all the way around this first round. Okay, we have our first round done with all purl stitches. The next round is again just purl stitches. So go ahead and purl all the way around. Our next 2 rounds are going to be in a purl 1, knit 1 rib. So we're going to start with purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, all the way around, and then all the way around again. Great, so that completes our 4-round repeat. The first 2 rounds are purl stitches, and then the second 2 rounds are purl 1, knit 1 ribbing. So we're just going to keep going with that repeat. So purl for 2 rounds, purl 1, knit 1 for 2 rounds, and we're going to keep going until the work measures 7 inches from the cast on edge. We'll meet back up there. I'm back at the beginning of round marker, and we are going to get ready to put the back stitches on hold. So the first thing we're going to do is work in pattern for 70 stitches. Since I've ended after 2 purl rows, we're back on the purl 1, knit 1 patterning. So count 70 stitches and stop there. So I've worked in pattern for 70 stitches from the beginning of round marker, and we're ready to put our back stitches on hold. I'm going to take a darning needle and some scrap yarn, and I'm now going to just move those stitches back a little bit and slip the next 70 stitches onto this scrap yarn just by placing my needle through each stitch, pushing them up along the needle and threading them through there. So all the way back to the beginning of round marker, that will be 70 stitches. I have my back stitches all on this yarn now, and I'm going to just tie a bow. You can double knot it if you'd like. We're now going to just be working along the front of the sweater here. So I'm going to turn my work. This is a little bit different than how we were knitting before because we were knitting just on the right side, around and around in circles. Now we're going to be knitting flat back and forth. So the patterning is going to change slightly. The last row we did, we had the purl knit section all the way across. And we're going to do the same thing on the back here. So purl into this stitch, knit into this stitch. I've worked to the end and I'm turning my work now. So we are back on the right side and we are ready to start what would have been the 2 purl rows. So this is where it changes a little bit. On the right side here, you can see this is the front of the sweater, the way it's going to look when it's worn. We're going to still purl all the way across, but when we turn our work and we're back on the wrong side, we're going to knit all the way across because knitting on the opposite side will show a purl bump. If that's confusing, I'll show you what I mean by that. So go ahead on the right side here and purl all the way across. After purling all the way across, we're turning our work to be on the wrong side, and this is the part of the pattern that changes. So instead of purling all the way across, we're going to knit all the way across. And you'll see that by knitting stitches on the wrong side, I'm making purl bumps on the right side. So it'll look the same, it'll match the rest of the patterning. So go ahead and knit all the way across on this wrong side. Okay, I'm back on the right side now. We had just knit across the wrong side. I'm going to place on the screen the pattern that you're going to follow for the next 4 inches. So measuring from where we split the front and the back, you're going to measure 4 inches, continuing in the pattern, and once again, you're going to end after the 2 purl rows, what look like 2 purl rows. So it's purling across the front, knitting across the back, and then you're going to be done, and we'll meet back up there. We are now ready to bind off stitches for our neckband. The first thing we're going to do is work 28 stitches in pattern. We are on a purl 1, knit 1 row. So go ahead and purl 1, knit 1 for 28 stitches. Next, we need to bind off 14 stitches. So I'm going to knit into the first stitch, knit into this next stitch, pass the first stitch over top, and do that 14 times. So there's 1, 2, 3, all the way to 14. There's my 14 stitches, bless you. There's my 14 stitches bound off, and you'll notice we have 1 stitch left on here, and we need to work the remaining stitches in pattern. Altogether, there's going to be 28, but since this one's already worked, we're going to start with knit instead of purl for the rest of the patterning. So you can pretend this first one was purl 1. Now we're going to knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and you can see if you ever get lost, these rows here with the knit stitches, you'll always know that for the ribbing pattern, this is where you knit, and where you only see the purl bumps, this is where you purl. So if you ever lose track of where you are, you'll know where the knit stitches are and the purl stitches are. So knit, purl, knit, purl, all the way to the end. Count the stitches left and you should have 28. I now have 28 stitches on the left shoulder. I've bound off 14 stitches and I have 28 on the right shoulder. We are only going to continue working the right shoulder right now. If you'd like to put these stitches on hold, you can, but I'm just going to leave them on the cord. So we're going to turn our work, and for this first row here, we're going to continue in pattern. So we are purl 1, knit 1 until the end. Turning my work, so I'm back on the right side. We are now going to bind off 4 stitches. So we will knit into the first stitch, knit into the next stitch, pass the first stitch over. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we will work the rest of the stitches in pattern, and we're back on our purl row. So go ahead and purl the rest of the stitches. Back on the wrong side, we are going to knit all the way across here. On the right side, we are now going to bind off 2 stitches. Knit into the first stitch, into the second stitch, pass 1 over, and 1 more time, pass 1 over. Working the remaining stitches in pattern. Remember, we have 1 over here, which you can pretend that you purled. So we're going to do knit 1, purl 1 all the way down. On the wrong side now, we are going to work in pattern. So purl 1, knit 1 all the way down. Right side, we're going to bind off 2 stitches once again, knit into the first stitch, pass that stitch over, knit into the next stitch, pass over, and we're back on our purl row, so purl to the end. This is our last time on the wrong side row. We're going to knit across. So there's our shoulder. If you count your stitches, you should have 20 on the needle here, and we're going to bind off now. So you can go ahead and bind off all stitches. At the final stitch, break your yarn, and you can pass that yarn through the stitch here. That's going to secure it. All right, so now we'll start working on our other shoulder. We're now ready to work across the left shoulder. So we are going to take our yarn and join it on the right side. So you're looking for those purl bumps. This is the wrong side, this is the right side. Go ahead and take your yarn. We're going to start with a purl stitch. So purl into that first stitch. Now the yarn is connected, and we're going to continue in pattern all the way across to here. So knit, purl, knit, purl, all the way to the end. We're now on the wrong side and we are going to bind off 4 stitches. We're going to bind these stitches off purlwise because we're on the wrong side. So go ahead and purl into the first stitch, purl into the next stitch, pass the first stitch over. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are going to go ahead and knit the rest of the stitches. On the right side, we are going to purl across all stitches. On the wrong side, we're going to bind off 2 stitches purlwise. 1, 2, and now we are going to knit 1, purl 1 for the remainder of the patterning. Right side, work all stitches in pattern, purl 1, knit 1. Wrong side, bind off 2 stitches purlwise. And knit the remainder of the stitches. Right side, we're going to purl across all of the stitches. And wrong side, you should have 20 stitches. We're going to bind off all stitches purlwise. We have finished the shoulder and neck shaping for the front of our sweater, and now we're ready to put the back stitches back on the needles. So go ahead and find where the first stitch was placed on the yarn, and you're just going to go one by one, pick up those stitches all the way down. Joining the yarn on the right side of the work, we're going to start with a purl stitch. So bringing my yarn in front, going into the first stitch, purling. That stitch is going to loosen up, you can just retighten it. So we're going to continue working for 4.5 inches now, and we're going to work in pattern with the purl 1, knit 1 across the right side, purl 1, knit 1 across the wrong side, purl all the way across the right side, and knit all the way across the wrong side, just like we did for the front piece here. So go ahead and do that for 4.5 inches and end with 2 purl rows. Now that the back section is complete, we're going to work on binding off our stitches for the neckline and then working our shoulders with decreases. So we're going to first work in pattern for 26 stitches with purl 1, knit 1. Next, we're going to bind off 18 stitches. Knit into the first stitch, second stitch, pass your stitch over. There's 1, 2, 3. We're binding off 18. We're now going to finish working these stitches in pattern. So remember, we already have 1 on our right hand needle, so we're going to start with knit 1, purl 1 to the end, and you should have 26 stitches. We're now going to work the back left shoulder only. Again, you could put these stitches on hold if you want. I'm just going to leave them on the cord and keep working like this. So we're going to turn our work, and we are going to work across in pattern with purl 1, knit 1. On the right side, we're going to start with binding off 4 stitches knitwise. So knit into the first stitch, into the second stitch. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to finish in pattern with purling all the way to the end. On the wrong side, we're going to knit all the way across. Right side, we're going to bind off 2 stitches. 1, 2. Finish in pattern with a knit one, purl one to the end. Wrong side, work across in pattern, purl one, knit one to the end. Right side, purl across all stitches, bless you. Wrong side, knit across all stitches. All right, you should have 20 stitches left on the needle, and we're going to bind off knitwise. We're ready to work the back right shoulder, so go ahead and grab your yarn, and we're going to connect it with a purl stitch, going into that first stitch here, looping your yarn around. So purl one, knit one to the end. On the wrong side, we're going to bind off 4 stitches purlwise, 4, and now you're going to knit the rest of the stitches. Right side, purl all stitches. Wrong side, we'll bind off 2 stitches purlwise. And working the remaining stitches in pattern with knit one, purl one. Right side, work all stitches with purl one, knit one. Wrong side, knit all stitches. Right side, purl all stitches. Wrong side, bind off all stitches purlwise. We're now ready to seam our shoulders together, but before we do that, I really like to clean up some of these strands that are left hanging here. So I'm gonna grab my darning needle and weave in a few of these ends. Just going to find the bars in here. You'll see there's bars in between the knit stitches, and just pass it through the top half of a few of those bars and back up. And one more time. And then I'll just trim this end right here, and I'll do that with the rest of the loose ends before I seam the shoulders. Get everything lined up here. And I'm going to start from the outside edge where the armhole will be. I'm grabbing a piece of yarn that matches the sweater, just about, I'd say about 14 inches long. Weaving it through my darning needle. And I'm just going to be looking for, you see these V's here? I'm going to match them up with the V's on the other side. So I'm going to go in through 2 legs of the first V and match that up over here, pulling it through while leaving a couple inches on the end here so that we can weave it in after. I'm going to go back through the next 2 V's and just keep working like that, back and forth. I've worked all the way across here. I'll just weave in these ends and then seam the other shoulder the same way. I have the sweater flipped back to the right side, and we're ready to pick up stitches for the neckline. I'm now going to grab my 4mm needles with the 16-inch cord, so the smaller circular needles. I'm going to start at the edge here where my shoulder is seamed together, and we're going to go around and pick up approximately 72 stitches. If you pick up a few more or a few less, that's okay, but you want an even number. If you're still using the larger size needles, you're still going to pick up the same amount of stitches, and then you're going to knit magic loop. So if you don't know how to knit magic loop, I'll put a timestamp here and you can follow along because that's how I'll be knitting the sleeves. To pick up these stitches, I'm taking my yarn here and I'm going to go in through 2 legs of a stitch, grab my yarn and pull it through. And then the next stitch, 2 legs, pull through, and I'm just going all the way around like that. I've picked up my 72 stitches. Now I'm going to join in the round and place a stitch marker. We are going to work a knit 1, purl 1 rib for 2 inches. I finished my 2 inches of ribbing here and I'm ready to bind off. So I'm going to take off the beginning of round marker, and we want to bind these stitches off loosely. It's for the neck, so we want to make sure there's extra stretch there. I'm going to knit into the first stitch and I'm going to loop the strand of yarn over top of the needle here and then knit into the second stitch. I'm then going to pass the 2 stitches over. So again, I have 1 stitch here, looping over, knitting into the next stitch, grabbing both of those stitches and passing over. If you have another stretchy bind off technique that you like to use, go ahead and do that. And we're just going to do that all the way around. I'm at the end here, and before we break our yarn where we usually would, we're going to break a long strand of yarn here because we're going to use it to weave in the neckline. So I'm going to take that yarn, I've broken off a bunch here, and then I will pass it through that stitch to secure everything. All right, and now we're ready to seam the neckline. We're going to be creating a double folded collar by seaming down the top half of the neckline. So we're going to be looking to match up this stitch here from the top to the bottom. So you always want to be looking to make sure you're on the right strand. We don't want it to get twisted and pull over because it's going to create a diagonal line on the front. So I'm following this stitch all the way down, and I'm just going to go in through 2 legs of yarn there and pull in. So we are going to continue like that all the way around. All right, things are really starting to come together now, and we're ready to pick up the sleeves. So I'm going to start at the underarm with my larger needles, my 5.5 millimeter needles. Take my yarn, go into 2 strands here, loop through. We're going to be picking up 52 stitches for the arm. Remember that the front of the sweater is slightly shorter than the back of the sweater for the armhole. So you're going to want to pick up maybe 2 or 3 stitches less on the front and 2 or 3 stitches more on the back. I've picked up my 52 stitches, and now we need to divide our stitches for magic loop. So we want 26 stitches on each needle, and this is going to be the same if you've chosen to knit your neckband using the magic loop technique. You want to divide the number of stitches you've picked up for the neckband by 2, and that's how many you're going to have on each needle. All right, so we need 26 here for the sleeve. So 26. Going to pull the cord through. All right, I would recount the stitches on both needles just to make sure you're set up correctly, and then we will get started with our sleeve. Our first round is going to be a purl round. So I've got my needles lined up facing my right hand. I'm going to take the back needle and pull it through. So those stitches are just resting on the cord. I'm going to bring my yarn in front, and I'm going to start purling. This first stitch is going to be loose because there's a loose end. So purl. I'm going to do one more before I tighten that up. I'm just going to go looking for that end, tighten that up a bit. All right, and I'm going to purl all the way down this first needle. If you're using this magic loop technique for the neckband, remember you're doing knit 1, purl 1. So I'm purling here for the sleeve, but for the neck, you would be doing knit 1, purl 1. So I've purled all the way across. I'm going to flip my work, pull this needle back onto the stitches. Now I'm again having both my needles facing my right hand, pulling the back needle off, bringing my yarn in front, and purling. Magic loop seems like a lot of work until you get used to it, and once you get used to it, you won't even think twice about it anymore. It'll seem very natural, so you just have to get through the learning phase with it. Take it slow. If it's not making sense the way I'm explaining it, there are many, many tutorials, and someone might explain it in a way that resonates better with you. So don't get frustrated at this point. Take it slow with Magic Loop if you're learning for the first time. So that's a full round of purling in Magic Loop. Again, I'm going to flip my work, pull this needle back onto the stitches, and we're ready to start round 2. So both my needles are facing my right hand. For round 2, I'm going to pull the back needle off, and again, we are going to purl all the way around. So there's our first 2 rounds in Magic Loop. We're going to now move on to the next 2 rounds, which are purl 1, knit 1. So again, pulling my back needle off, and now we are working purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1 on both needles, and then again on both needles. We're going to do those 4 rounds one more time before we start our decreases. So 2 rounds of purling all of our stitches and 2 rounds of purl 1, knit 1. Once you finish those rounds, we'll get ready to start our decreases. We're now ready to start our decreases, and we're going to decrease 4 stitches every other pattern repeat. So basically every other purl row, we're going to decrease. So we are going to start with purl 1, purl 2 together, purl 2 together. So that's 2 stitches decreased. Purl all the way across this needle. And on the second needle, we're going to purl until the last 5 stitches. I'm at the last 5 stitches, and I'm going to purl 2 together, purl 2 together, and purl 1. The next round is purl all stitches, and the next 2 rounds are purl 1, knit 1 ribbing. All right, so for our decrease section, so far we have 2 purl rows, 1 with decreases, and 2 purl 1, knit 1 rows. Remember that we're only decreasing every other purl section. So for the next 4 rounds, we won't be decreasing. We'll be following our stitch patterning without any decreases. So you're going to do purl all the way around, purl all the way around again, purl 1, knit 1 all the way around, purl 1, knit 1 all the way around. The same patterning we've done the whole time without any decreases for these next 4 rounds. So go ahead and do that. Having completed those 8 rounds equals 1 decrease section, you're going to complete those 8 rounds 2 more times. I'm going to put a timestamp here in case you forget how to do the decreases. So once you've done 2 more decrease sections, we are going to meet back up for the ribbing. I'm all finished with my decrease rounds, and I'm ready to start the ribbing. So I'm going to get my long cord 4mm needles, and I'm going to start by slipping all of my stitches onto these needles. Again, you can knit onto the needles if that's your preference. We need to separate these stitches once again for Magic Loop, so count out 20 stitches for the first needle. And pull the cord through. So we now have 20 stitches on each needle. Going to continue with Magic Loop with knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. You're going to complete this ribbing for 1 inch, and then you're going to bind off the stitches, not too tight. We want to make sure that the cuff is still stretchy enough. I'm ready to bind off my stitches now, and I'm going to pay attention to not pull my stitches too tight. We want to maintain a little bit of stretch for the wrist. You can use a designated stretchy bind off if you like. I just prefer the look of a regular bind off on the cuff. So go ahead and bind off all of these stitches. Having finished the first sleeve, you're going to go ahead and knit the second sleeve the exact same way. So I'm going to put the timestamp in the video and you can go back and rewatch that. Once you're finished the second sleeve, weave in your ends, you can block your work, and then you have your completed Marsa sweater. Thank you so much for following along with this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Kabora Knits, and you can use the hashtag Marsa Sweater to share your work. I love to see all the different projects. If you would like to keep on this knitting journey, I have other pattern tutorials available on my YouTube channel, so go ahead and check that out. Until next time, happy knitting!